Hello, greetings everyone to this month's Wildlife Society webinar hosted by the working groups. My name is Scott Brainerd. I'm currently serving as chair of the International Wildlife Management Working Group. I'm based in Norway, where I'm an associate professor in wildlife management. Just a little bit about the working group before we get started. The International Wildlife Management Working Group of the Wildlife Society provides a forum for TWS members to network with wildlife professionals from around the world on a wide range of issues pertaining to wildlife management and habitat conservation. In this seminar, the topic is the role of TWS international student chapters going forward. I might mention in that context that our chat moderator is Paige Hillbaum. Paige is currently serving as the first president of the Inland Norway University of Applied Sciences student chapter here in Evenstad, Norway. And she's currently a master's student there. Before we move on, I just want to state a little bit more about the seminar. Coming off the heels of forming the first student chapter outside North America, the International Wildlife Management and Student Development Working Groups have teamed up. We want to give the floor to students and educators from both Norway, the United States, and beyond to ask them their opinions about the role of TWS in supporting international student chapters moving forward. We hope you join us and help spark conversations about the quality of education in different countries, experiences working or studying abroad, and why international students are or are not interested in the Wildlife Society. So that's basically the abstract for this seminar. So it is my pleasure now to introduce and welcome our panelists. I'll just briefly mention your names, and then we'll go back to the first person I mentioned, and then from there I'll let the panelists give a brief sketch about themselves and their experiences in the international arena. So we have Dr. Scott Mills, if you want to raise your hand, Scott. Brittany Shaw, Kevin Zimmerman, Kathan Bandiapai. And with that, Scott, please introduce yourself.
Hello all, so I'm Scott Mills. I'm an American. I'm a professor at the University of Montana. I focus on wildlife population ecology, which means I bring together data from the field and data from genetic fields and computational biology and pull all those things together to think about how we can reduce stressors on wildlife populations. Let's see, so one of the questions they wanted us to ask is, well, what's my experience with TWS? I first joined TWS when I was an undergraduate in the early 1980s. I've been a member ever since, except for maybe some breaks when they didn't have good student discounts and I couldn't afford to be a member as a student. Otherwise, I've been a member ever since. In terms of countries that I've worked in, I just want to say that my start was kind of illustrative, I would say. I was a second-year assistant professor here at University of Montana. I hadn't really done any international research before. And I had a really bright undergraduate who wanted to be a graduate student through our Peace Corps program. She said, Scott, I'd like to work with you and do an international project in Asia. And so I thought, oh, well, all I got to do is just write some people and say, hey, I've got this great student. And we'd like to come do a project in your country that I know nothing about. And I'm like a Martian just writing these folks and saying, I want to come parachuting in with a graduate student to do research. And basically I got slapped. I got humbled real fast. People either ignored me or they said, that I was, they basically kind of chided me. And so from that, though, I learned a lot. I learned the whole idea of, that we'll talk about later, of appreciating cultures, coming in slowly, being humble, a lot of those kinds of things. But anyway, from that, I've gone on to work in a lot of different countries. Oh, and I should say that Flying Fox project actually continues even now. So we did learn a lot of lessons, and it's run still by that original student from 25 years ago. She still runs that project. But anyway, I've worked in Scotland, Portugal, Sweden, Norway, Austria, Namibia, New Zealand, China, India, Bhutan. And of those, probably my most extensive time in country has been in Bhutan and India, where I've had over the last 15 years, lots of training workshops, mentoring grad students on projects with snow leopards and tigers and elephants. I've also spent a bunch of time in Scandinavia, where I've helped to evaluate favorable conservation status for carnivores in Sweden and Norway. And I will just mention that I'm now working part-time at Inland Norway University, where Scott and Paige and Darwin are. And this coming summer, I'll be spending another couple of months there. Other than that, I think I'll pretty much turn it over. I guess the only other one was whether there was a question of where do I want to work, in what species, what's my dream job. I'll just say I've had my dream job. I'm lucky enough to say that I've lived my dream job, and so I will leave it to the students to think more about what they want to do for their dream jobs.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, Scott. Next, Brittany.
Hi, my name is Brittany, and I'm an American, and I am a student at Clear University in the country of US. My experience with TWS so far has been great. Like I can't express how much engagement I've gotten since joining TWS, and it's just amazing. And I would definitely encourage every student to join TWS if I can. I did just recently join TWS too, so I haven't had much experience with studying the countries and working with like different studies yet, because I'm just now joining. So, but I'm looking to maybe further that down the road. So again, that I can't really answer the question about my appliance from the knowledge that I've gained from another country, because I haven't been too many at all yet. So, but I do for the future would like to work at like I forget, like a state games land area, like where we can like take tours and teach people about the different animals that are in the wildlife and stuff like that, and just work with them on that.
Okay, great. Thanks, Brittany. Kevin Zimmerman.
Hello, everybody. I'm Kevin. I am currently also in Evenstad, Inland University of Norway. And I am half Norwegian, or half Sami for that sake, and half German. And I was born in Kirkenes, which is in the north of Norway, Finnmark, and then traveled back and forth to Germany and back all the time. And but finally made it back home. And my experience with TWS, I got a free membership from Darwin, so thank you, Darwin, for that. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to attend all of the TWS talks, but the ones that I actually were on, they were really interesting. Like people with a lot more experience than myself, for example, just telling us what they've been working on, how they've struggled in their careers. Sometimes real eye-openers happened. Like we had, I apologize, I can't remember her name, but she was German, and she talked about whales, marine biology. And she told us that the chances of getting a job in marine biology were 1 to 10,000 maybe, or 1,000. I can't remember, but sort of bursts your bubble, but it's still very interesting to hear. Countries that I've worked in and studied. I have studied in Germany for 3 weeks. That was a teacher study for biology and English. But I understood pretty quickly that I don't really want to become a teacher. I'm not really great at that. So I stopped after 3 weeks and started working in the supermarket. And then through organization in Germany, which is called NABU, like NABU. They're sort of the group that do all the nature protection and stuff over there. And through them, I was able to get in touch with a woman who ran a small raptor center in the south of Germany. And that was the coolest experience I've had so far. It was a small center, like probably 20 birds on average, but really incredible work. Just getting them in the field or getting them from people, bringing them to the vet, nursing them back to health, and then releasing them, the part that everybody wants to do, just incredible. And she stopped doing that, and then there was a 3-month gap where they didn't have anybody to do the job. And since I've been helping her out, I was able to lead the small station for 3 months. So that was like coolest thing I've ever done. Let's see. Well, have you been able to apply the experience? The raptor knowledge that I gained sort of helps me out a bit on my thesis now, which is about food competition between white-tailed eagles and eagle owls in the north of Norway. But yeah, like the general understanding of raptors, but not really. I mean, I didn't do anything management based, so in that case, not really, but yeah, still interesting. And my dream job is definitely something with raptors, and if that doesn't work out, something with fish, salmon. That's like the next in line. And it's funny that we have Scott here, because it's Alaska that's sort of been my dream for 3 years roughly. And yeah, like if I could, the Raptor Center in Sitka is of course the first thing I think about, but I think also to work with salmon, I think there's definitely a market there with probably king salmon is the most precious one. But yeah, I think that's it for the introduction.
Thanks, Kevin. You are currently a bachelor's student, correct?
Yes, viltforvaltning.
Yeah, so you're doing a bachelor's thesis, just to clarify that. Great, thanks. Katan?
Hi, I'm Kathan. I'm a PhD student at the University of Wyoming. I'm an Indian. I recently joined TWS and recently interested in the international student group because of the collaboration and amazing people that is working on different parts of the globe. I worked previously in United Kingdom and in India. So in India, I'm mostly involved in large carnivore projects like All India Tiger Estimation, Leopard Estimation, and now I'm dovetailing with Wildlife Institute of India with the reintroduction of the cheetahs from South Africa and Namibia, the only large carnivore that got extirpated in independent India. And during my master thesis, I was involved in the proposed reintroduction of the pine martens in the southern England for the management of the invasive Eurasian grey squirrels, and give a safe passage to the native red squirrels. So after that, I started working with large carnivores, and for my PhD thesis, I am looking at the cascading effects of the sympatric mesocarnivore upon the arrival of cheetahs. And I am also dovetailing with a couple of other projects in our lab, including the mega herbivore occupancy in the fenced reserve in South Africa, and the habitat utilization and the space use in the urban wildlife interface of Mongolia. So, and these are the countries I worked and the experiences I gained over the years. And as Dr. Miles worked in Asia and Africa and many other people, so I think that most of the African and the Asian countries has adopted a single species conservation policy, and how the umbrella of that single species can protect and support other species. But it is not true for long-ranging species like the Indian peninsular wolf, caracal, which are going through severe decline. So I think that my dream job is to work with them, which needs a conservation push, and which we have to develop some unique sampling technique to actually estimate their densities and estimate their abundances and what conservation management implications we can take to protect them. Thank you.
Thank you, Ketan. That was very interesting. Just a quick follow-up question. My ears perked up when you said pine martens, because that's my specialty. Who did you work with in Great Britain?
I worked with Dr. Philip Baker in the University of Reading, and Dr. Manuela Gonzalez Suarez, who is also from University of Reading. So yeah, we're actually looking at the gray squirrels, the change in the feeding time upon giving the naive and the native predatory cues.
I see. Great. Thank you. Okay, well, that concludes our introduction of the panelists. Thank you very much. Now we'll go and start addressing the actual questions we need to discuss during this seminar. So I think we have several questions. You have them in front of you. And I'm wondering which of you would like to address that first question. How important are international experiences to your wildlife careers? Should there be an international exchange component to wildlife education? And how can we make sure students have equal access to these types of opportunities? Anybody want to try that one?
I have thoughts, but I'd like to hear the students' thoughts first.
Yeah.
I mean, I can try.
Sure.
Oh. Well, there probably should be an international aspect, because in the subject that I have with you right now, Scott, it's really interesting to see like sort of how the management styles differ from Norway, for example, because most of the teachers here only talk about Finland and Sweden when it comes to international stuff. But with you, we got sort of Alaska and Montana, the states in general. And it's just, it's really interesting to sort of see the differences there and what we can learn from them, and sort of maybe we could even improve stuff in Norway with that knowledge. So I think that that would be very good to sort of burst the bubble and look a bit further, you know. So, yeah.
Great. Anybody else want to try that one?
Yeah, I think the most, I mean, as I've worked and partly involved in different countries and different projects, what I find really interesting is human perspective to wildlife and how that has been changing over the continent, over the countries. And it's spectacular that a country with 1 billion people lives with 3,000 odd tigers. And some lions and 22,000 leopards, and they are bringing feeders. So how the human perspective changes from one country to another country, and what are the drivers for that? And if we able to find that, I think that is the most cost-effective conservation solution we have in our hands. So I think that is the most exciting thing about the international work.
Thank you. Anyone else want to try that one? Brittany?
Yeah, so I'd say that I agree with you guys, and that is sort of what we would call in the population ecology world a hybrid vigor that comes from outbreeding. And you guys have sort of identified that both in terms of scientific views. You know, there's this astonishing discovery sometimes when you go to a different culture and you find people working on exactly what you've been thinking about for a really long time, but approaching it from a different perspective. And that is, you know, we tend to think that the world has become so flat from you know, social media and the internet. but there's still a lot of, again, using a metaphor from wildlife population ecology, there's still a lot of population structure. There's still a lot of sort of fundamentally different ways of viewing the world, viewing conservation, viewing best way to survey or estimate or model or answer big questions. So that hybrid vigor really is important. And also, of course, exactly the cultural aspects, this appreciation that, wow, okay, in this culture, I really need to just sit and listen for a long time. Or in this culture, I need to be very respectful of, you know, the million different ways that cultures differ. So yeah, I do think there should be, it would be really, you know, I would say that that it would be great to have a component, you know, to the question of should there be a component, international exchange component to wildlife education. I would say yes, there should, but I would also hasten to say that it should be strongly recommended, but not required.
Yeah.
Because of your next question, which is how can we make sure students have equal access to these types of opportunities? And I have some thoughts on that too, but I don't know if you want to, if maybe there's more discussion on this.
Anybody else have anything they want to say to this before Scott continues?
I just wanted to ask Kevin and Brittany if they had, Kevin, you mentioned that you really wanted to go to Alaska. Have either of you considered taking your graduate degree at all and maybe taking it abroad? Is that something that interests you? Is that something where you're thinking, oh no way, that's not for me? Is that an avenue that you see more of your student peers or friends taking?
Well, I have thought about it, but the problem is that my family is here. And I thought if I just do the master's in Norway, for example, in Evenstad or in Ås, then I'll have 2 more years with them. But once I'm over the ocean, you know, it's going to be less contact. So I think the family aspect sort of will pushing the brakes on that one. But it sounds super interesting, but I don't think I'm going to do that now.
So what's actually funny is I'm not a biology major, I'm an education major, but I've always had a strong drive for wildlife, and I've always had like a big liking to the wildlife and the stuff around like the world and stuff like that. But so that's why like I started out with TWS to further my interest in it, to see like what I would like and what I could do with that. And I've actually like thought about furthering my degree after I'm done here at Clarion and getting like a degree or like a minor in wildlife, so I could be able to do the things that I love about wildlife and be able to further that. So being able to have an opportunity to do that would be awesome.
Have you considered going overseas?
I haven't considered that yet, but it could be a possibility depending on like where life takes me and like how everything goes with Clarion here and like everything like that.
Good. All right. Thanks. Scott, you had some further thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, so to the question of, okay, we all agree that there is value in international experiences, but how do we make sure that there's equal access to these kinds of opportunities? It's a really key point. And I would say the responsibility lies on both students and faculty, mostly faculty. So let me just say a little bit on both of those. You know, it's really going to be the job of the faculty to push the university administration, but really I think the best way to go about it is to push donors and funding agencies for opportunities for students to study abroad. So for example, we had a really great example here at University of Montana just a couple of years ago. A donor gave the College of Forestry and Conservation and Wildlife Biology program the largest donation that's ever been given at the University of Montana. And this donor gave the donation specifically for international training. So it created this entire new unit on campus, the Global Leadership Initiative, where any undergraduate can join the Global Leadership Initiative. They take classes that gives them cultural awareness, and then they actually have an expense paid. They can take a trip, a study abroad anywhere in the world, and it's all paid for by this donor's fund. So that immediately opens up access to everybody. So you don't have to be You don't have to be, you know, wealthy or have a lot of money, because it's all paid for by this donor. So I think that is the job of faculty, to really push for those kinds of initiatives. But I will also say that students have a job, which is to take advantage of these things. At a university where I was a while ago, North Carolina State University, there was hundreds of exchange opportunities that were available that just got left on the table because students didn't want to travel overseas. And here we have opportunities that are not fully being used. And it's very much a use it or lose it sort of thing. A donor is not going to want to continue to fund something that they feel isn't being used. So yeah, I think it's the faculty's job to find the money to allow anybody to do it. But then I do think it's the student's job to take advantage of those opportunities. And also the last thing I'll say is, let's not let anybody propose to do international engagement via Zoom or webinars, because we have to do it for this, right? But
Right.
I do worry that society is going to too easily say, well, actually, we can just save a lot of money and do our international engagement via Zoom. And of course, as we all know, that it'd be much better if we could all go out together after this and maybe have a meal and maybe some local culturally, the local cultural pride beers or whatever. So yeah, so let's not let it all become a internet thing.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. One thing I think about is, how can we make sure students have equal access to these types of opportunities? And when, you know, we're talking within the realm of the Wildlife Society, and perhaps, you know, you just mentioned an initiative and funding that I'd never heard of before, even though I'm a graduate of the University of Montana. And I'm thinking maybe TWS, we could, through the working group, set up some kind of an information channel for folks both within North America and outside to seek such opportunities for exchange, even though the Wildlife Society itself may not be able to fund that, but to direct people towards sources of funding in a kind of a clearinghouse type format or whatever. You know, I want to mention, I don't want to, as a moderator, I shouldn't really be saying too much, but I wanted to say one thing, and that is, I've been interacting with a Norwegian student who really wants to go to Montana to do her master's degree, and she was looking at Bozeman, and she said, you know, I realized I can't do it because, you know, Norwegians don't pay tuition like Americans do, and she said that it was just cost prohibitive for her to go to the US to get a degree in wildlife biology, an advanced degree, because of the costs associated. So that was kind of a challenge for me, trying to figure out that one. So I guess I'll just leave that right there without dwelling on it. But I think there are those issues with students, European students, and students from other countries where education is more or less free, or at least from an American standpoint, that people are very daunted now to come to the US unless they're on a scholarship, really. So just wanted to throw that out there.
Well, I will say that there are certainly universities, such as University of Montana, that for which no graduate student has ever had to pay $1 or a nickel or a euro out of their own savings to come to graduate school. We support all of our graduate students on fellowships or TAs. And so for graduate school, that's not it. That there's no anybody it's very competitive to get into our program. But if you get into our program, you won't have to pay anything. Now, it is more challenging at the undergraduate level for sure, because that's a place where tuition applies as well. But students should know that there's lots of schools in the U.S. where tuition and fees and stipend are covered for graduate students.
And I think that, again, is kind of a cross-cultural miscommunication, because I think there are a little bit different models, you know, and we can't really get into that now, but I think Norwegians have a different type of a master's program, and it's a little bit different bars for things compared to the US. And so that might be kind of confusing for some, but that's where I think it's incumbent upon the students also to try to understand the systems they're applying to, which may be difficult from afar. But thank you all for input on that first question. Let's move on to the next question, which is pretty related. What benefits do you see in pursuing a graduate degree in wildlife biology outside of your home country? And what are the drawbacks? Well, I think I mentioned one, at least, that's perceived, if it's not really actual. Anybody want to weigh in on that?
Katan, I thought you could take us through your experience of going to the US, because a lot of us think about us going out, but I'm also interested in how international students coming into the US, since TWS has a US perspective, how international students coming into the US feel about coming to study wildlife there and what their experience is like.
Yeah, great question, actually. When I was in Europe doing my master's, I mean, there are very few professors and very few institutes, I'd rather mention, in the United Kingdom who actually do some kind of international work other from the Wild Crew and ZSL. There is no other institutes I can name which actually runs a long-term research projects in other parts of Africa and Asia. But in the US, that's why it is very great, because there are lots of professors who are interested in international work, and they have done a long-term research in many countries. Like my professor, who is at the Dean of the Hub School, Dr. John Koprowski, who runs a projects in Italy, South Africa, Mongolia, India, Nepal. So there is a lot going on in our lab. So, and I didn't know much about the North American wildlife, to be really honest. I heard the names, but I didn't know about the ecology, their importance, what's going on, and how different sorts of linear infrastructure development actually how they are affecting their survival, and whether they are affecting the survival, and how the population management here is different from the population management in Asia and Africa. So I think the most important thing here is the coursework, which we do not have that much of in Asia. And in coursework, you have a comprehensive overview of North American conservation history and North American conservation culture. And I'm interested in large carnivores, so I have learned a lot about grizzly bears, brown bears, wolf, and mountain lions. So yeah, so this kind of, especially the course was taking different kind of statistical courses, GIS courses, will actually help me a lot when I go to my field and collect the data. I actually think a framework that how to collect the data and what is my research objective to that. That gives a shape. But graduate degrees are different in different countries. Like in most parts of the Europe, if I'm being correct, the PhD degree is about 3.5 years. In some parts, it's 4 years. But in the US, as you have to do a coursework, which I think is exceptionally good idea. You have to wildlife biology student usually spend 5.5 years for their graduate degree. So I think from my point of view, the US graduate degree, especially the PhD degrees, is some more comprehensive. I put it this way.
Okay, thanks. Thank you, Katan. Any other reflections on this topic?
I would just say that I think both directions for both American students looking out and for non-American students thinking about coming to the US, do be sure to, as I always like to say, as a general ecological principle, embrace uncertainty and variation, because there is a huge amount of variation in the sort of applied versus non-applied aspects, and also the sort of local approaches to graduate degrees within universities in the US, and also, of course, across Europe and Asia and Africa. And so, for example, you are exactly right, Katan, that PhDs can be 5 years, but I would say that, for example, in our program, if a student comes in with a master's degree, especially, the PhD would only be perhaps 3 more years after. You're right; it is a little bit more but different programs view those different ways. Things like one big thing that I've noticed when we've been recruiting students, especially from Bhutan, to come here, is the U.S. Comprehensive exams for the PhD are somewhat different. We have a pretty grueling 1 week writtens and then, oral exams, and those may or may not be the same as other universities, both in the U.S. and other countries. But so the last thing I'll just say on that is just that I think the moral of the story is to be sure when you're a student, think about where you think you want to be after schooling. If you think you want to be in your own home country, but you want to do study abroad, which is great, just be sure that the expectations that the people that would employ you within your own country would be filled by the graduate degree program that you're going to, and vice versa for people that are coming to the US, because there are differences. We have to acknowledge that, and they're not bad or good. They're just differences, cultural and historic differences.
Okay, great. Thank you. We have quite a few questions. We have about 5 minutes left before we're going to open it up to question and answer. The one thing that, basically is the title of the seminar is the role of the Wildlife Society International Student Chapters going forward. But these questions really don't address that directly. They kind of hit around a lot of the aspects that we think about when we think about international education in our field. So I think I'd like to just change things up a little bit here, because there's, topics here that we really can't get into in great detail with the time left, but let's go right to the heart of the matter. And that is there a role for international student chapters outside of North America? We haven't really mentioned Canada much, but the Wildlife Society basically is an organization that's a North American organization in the sense that it's Canada and the United States, because it's of the common language. Mexico is part of North America as well, but that country seems to be often overlooked in our discussions. But in this context, I would kind of like to redirect the panel a little bit from these questions we have regarding certification and wildlife education, to go back to the core role of student chapters as basically a way to become familiar with the Wildlife Society and what it offers. And can we envision a model for international student chapters within our organization going forward? Does anybody want to tackle that? And Paige, you shouldn't be shy.
I think we don't have any questions in the Q&A as of right now, so we can keep going on this topic. But I mean, it's my hope certainly that they're relevant. I only have experience in the US and Norway, so I've been really encouraged by the number of students that are interested in things like the Wildlife Society and what they offer. But it definitely is a ground up movement that needs a lot of help from some of the high levels as well. So it seems like it's been a unique challenge. But I am, like I said, I am really excited that, so many people here even today from different backgrounds are interested in the Wildlife Society, or that they want to be here. So I think that's a good sign.
Because anybody else want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I think that TWS international chapters can actually address some of the severe species decline, and those species are not flagship species. So they do not drive any kind of tourism attention or local people attention, that they are going through a severe decline from all over the globe. So I think through TWS, through different perspectives of different countries, we can actually give that kind of species a chance for their survival in their local ranges. And there is a growing misconception, which has been addressed in the growing research articles also, that the IUCN species listing is somewhat the global listing, but that may not be allowed, that may not be true for the local arena. I mean, if I put it really correctly, I'll give you an example, that in Caracal, like in Caracal, where the South African and Namibian population of the Caracal is thriving, to some extent, but the Arabian population and the Western Indian population are declining day by day. But it is not mentioned in the IUCN side because they're somewhat, the caracal comes under the same subspecies. So these kind of things which I think we can mention through TWS and give those species a chance.
Okay, thank you.
We had a few questions in chat. I think I can answer one of them, and maybe Scott, you can help me with the other one.
Sure.
Somebody asked how the Norwegian chapter started. Darwin and I basically just asked Mariah and TWS headquarters if that was something they would be interested in, because we were. And it actually, they were. It only took a couple of emails, and they said they would be supportive. So aside from editing some of the bylaws and seeing if any Norwegian students in our new university were interested, that was all it took to at least on paper start a student chapter. There's been a lot of extra work on top of that. And currently we're talking to some students in Japan also that are interested in starting a student chapter. But aside from just that loose framework collection, there's like I said, it's kind of a ground movement, and a lot of people don't know about TWS outside of North America as well. As far as the question about is TWS actively engaging with wildlife and ecology programs in other countries to start new chapters, I don't know if they're actively engaging other than through us and our working group, just because a lot of the active engagement builds on a personal network and a professional network. So I think TWS is mostly interested in expanding that interest in that network and seeing if there is a want for that in other countries. And like I said, I've been really positively surprised with the response that we've gotten in Norway, but that may or may not be the case for other countries. I've had lots of students ask me if they can start new chapters when they go back to their countries, and I've always been encouraging of that. So I can only say that it does start with students. So if you are interested in something like that, you can try to get a hold of me or just do your best. There's not really a guidebook for that, but I would encourage you to try. I think TWS has been supportive of me and our efforts here, certainly.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I guess I would just add that, the thing, it's a little bit, was very gratifying for me coming from Alaska back to Norway. And at the same time as I came back, Paige and Darwin took the initiative to this first non-North American, if you will, student chapter of the Wildlife Society. But it's basically, when you're outside of the US and Canada, basically, unless there is a national chapter of the Wildlife Society outside of those two countries, basically you're kind of outside the organizational setup. So I wonder if at some point we would want to have some kind of an international section or European section or something like that. But I think that's pretty far down, and that might actually evolve through the initiative of people who were in student chapters like the one we have here in Norway at some point. It's really hard to envision how that would look. So that's something that may occur through time. We have the International Union of Game Biologists, and that is something that is an entity that has international European-based meetings every couple of years. And we did interact with them here at the symposium in Hungary last fall, and Paige and some students took the initiative to a workshop, a panel discussion actually. So that was a certain kind of a collaboration and outreach. But I think there just has to be some kind of critical mass for that. And it seems like American students going abroad kind of miss the Wildlife Society. They want to set it up in whatever university they're at. That's one approach. Or international students coming back from the US or Canada that like that model and want to introduce a chapter or a student chapter in their own country or region within a country. It's a possibility too, I guess. But we need to do some strategic thinking about how to do that as a society. But anyway, I'm the moderator. I shouldn't be talking that much. We have some more questions and comments here, Paige.
I was just going to ask Kevin Kitson and Brittany how they got started with the Wildlife Society. You know, what appealed to you guys about the Wildlife Society when you first heard about it?
Should I start, or does anybody else want? All right. To be honest, I didn't really know what it was for, and I was curious because it was wildlife based. Since we don't really have anything similar here in Norway, like the people that I talk to in the day, it's just like Darwin has tried to make me look into like sort of my classmates if they would be interested as well in joining, but it sort of seems to be the understanding of what the Wildlife Society can do for us and what is actually meant to be seems to be lacking. Like they don't really understand what it is. So I hope that sort of becomes better with time here. But it just sounded interesting and it just sounded new. And I haven't really been disappointed. So I'm happy that it happened. So yeah.
Great.
So
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
So basically what like got me interested was, so we have an activities fair at each first week of classes for any new freshmen, people like students that come into Clarion as a like new student, to get them involved with different organizations that we have on campus. So that's how I found out about TWS, or about the Wildlife Society. We have a society on campus Clarion. It's called the Wildlife Society. It took me a while to get really fully involved in it, because I was trying to manage both classes and coursework and stuff like that. So then whenever I had free time, I was able to join the Wildlife Society. And then through them, I found TWS, and I have become a part of TWS as the treasurer for the student work and development group. So I've been able to really get involved with them and have really enjoyed my time with them. And so that's just basically how I pretty much found out about TWS. So I do encourage students to join organizations because that's how you get started.
Okay, great.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Katan.
Yeah, I was always interested in other people's work and how they are approaching their species of interest or landscape change or ecosystem services. So I was involved. I was going through one class, and the professor suggested me that you should join the TWS and subscribe to the Wyoming chapter and the international working group chapters to actually look into the other walks of the people. So yeah, that's how I did it.
Okay. Anything else that we want to address in chat, Paige?
Not at the moment. But I was kind of curious, both Scott Mills and Scott Brainerd, since you've been with the Wildlife Society for a while, I was wondering what your thoughts on like how the organization has changed, or what the organization has meant to you over your wildlife career.
Yeah, I mean I'd say it's been awesome. I think the whole it allowed me, even as an undergrad, I kind of knew what I wanted to do kind of early on, and the Wildlife Society opened up this door for me that you could be a biologist, you could be sort of a hardcore research biologist, but you could do it in an applied way to further conservation, because after all, that was really what inspired me to this field. After all, was sort of growing up and doing lots of stuff outside and thinking a lot about animals and watching animals. I think many of us were drawn to that. I don't think many of us were drawn to this career for huge salaries or political power. We were drawn because we want to do something about conservation. And I have been involved, as I said, with TWS since the undergrad in the 80s, but I also haven't been involved. My PhD advisor was the founder of Society for Conservation Biology, Michael Soule. And so I've been a part of Society for Conservation Biology since its very beginning in 1988. And there was gnashing of teeth in the early days that I always thought was silly between, you know, can you be a wildlife biologist and a conservation biologist, and are they competing societies? And I never bothered with any of that. I just always thought, well, that's great. Now we have two societies that think about similar kinds of issues. Certainly there are some differences in focal areas, but I think, you know, those two, I think it is important to note that that's another sort of parallel society. And interestingly, the Society for Conservation Biology about 15 years ago went hardcore for international presence. They said, we do not want to be a North American society. And so they made big pushes for international chapters, sometimes to the chagrin of the North American side, because there was hardly ever an SCB meeting within North America. So it was really expensive to be sending your students all around the world, you know, for the conferences. But anyhow, I guess I'm only going to say that to say TWS has been awesome. And, you know, and also for me, as Society for Conservation Biology has also been a really great organization. And I think the two should be, you know, are viewed as complementary and not competitive in my view.
I guess I would just add that, you know, I joined the Wildlife Society not really knowing much about it when I was an undergraduate at the University of Alaska back in the 1970s. And right away, what struck me was it was a place to learn. Basically every month, somebody from Fish and Game, the Fish and Wildlife Service, you know, professionals are coming and presenting their projects. And that was extremely stimulating. And that was also a way to make contacts, which really served me well because I wound up working for Fish and Game as a technician back in the day. And we also had international students that would come, who were part of that Wildlife Society. Not so much the graduate students, but there were some, primarily from Arctic countries, actually, Scandinavia, which is probably where that piqued my interest for Scandinavia way back. But when I went to the University of Montana in Missoula to do my master's degree, that was back when the sections were really a big deal. The Northwest section had these annual meetings and it traveled all over the Northwest. And that was really, really stimulating with those big conferences, not as big as the national conferences now, but they were pretty significant. And then I went to Norway and I was there for 20 years. I got my PhD at what was called then the Agriculture University of Norway. And I missed the Wildlife Society when I was in Europe, but we had, you know, the Nordic Collegium of Wildlife Ecology and had annual oikos conferences and that. So we did have platforms for meeting. We had the IOGB, but we didn't have the Wildlife Society. And I missed that. So when I returned to Alaska after 20 years to work again for the Alaska Department of Fish and Game, I was real happy to be able to join the chapter there in Alaska and attend those annual meetings. Before I knew it, I was asked to run for president, and that was really a fulfilling experience. And then later, I was president of the Northwest section as well. And so it kind of came full circle after 20 years of being a member overseas and getting my journal sent, you know, in the mail prior to the internet, but not really being involved and really missing that. And then coming back to the States and then coming back here and being involved even still here through the International Working Group and also through the International Student Chapter here at Avonstad. So that's kind of my story in a nutshell. But for me, the Wildlife Society is just a fantastic platform for learning and networking. And that's, to me, one of the main benefits, plus just the scientific benefit of the publications, of course. Okay, let's see. We have a few minutes left. One thing that one of the participants mentioned here, Jose Soto, said, and this is something that the International Working Group has been discussing, is the idea of a mentorship program that helps international students with graduate school selection, and writing applications and funding proposals, as well as research funds. That was mentioned by one of our participants here, and that's actually something we've been discussing as part of our vision as an organization, at least within the working group. is that something that we can do concretely? I think, and that along those lines is to mentor and have members uh, that are interested in international work in the US, Canada, or elsewhere that want to help folks either within North America or outside to make those connections. So I think that's something concrete. One other thing, I guess, is going back to this concept of certification. That's actually the last question. Do you see a need for certification process for wildlife biologists in your country? And would it be possible to have a global certification of wildlife biologists? Anybody want to weigh in on that?
I would say yes within countries, but I would say no for a global certification. And the reason is both culturally, the idiosyncrasies would be ignored in every direction or not fully respected in every direction. And also the topic matter of importance across countries is so different. So I think that would have to blossom. Some fundamental pieces might blossom up to would be shared across countries, but I would say that would need to start within country and go from there.
I tend to agree personally. Anybody else have thoughts on that matter?
Yeah, I actually agree with Dr. Miles, because I also believe that there are many people who don't have any formal education. They're working in different parts of the globe, but they have an excellent sense of field work. But they do not know how to write, how to prepare a manuscript, how to publish, and how to get a graduate degree. So certification cannot be inclusive for those people. So so I think I fully agree with him.
Now, in my experience, I've had folks in other countries ask me to be basically a reference for, in order for them to apply for certification, because they're in a country with no certified biologists. There was one individual from United Arab Emirates who reached out to me, and he had a very impressive background and resume, but he hit a barrier there because the requirement, and I may be wrong about this, but at least my perception was, and seemed to be the case, was that he needed 2 certified wildlife biologists to vouch for his application. And so there's some accommodations we can make for those that want to get the current Wildlife Society certification, but and that there are obviously people that want to do that live outside of North America. So that's one aspect that we can think about. But again, I think about that just, the education system between Norway and Sweden are somewhat different, and then you have the language issues, and maybe also formal requirements within countries. I know in certain countries or provinces, like in Canada, there are other certification programs that, like in British Columbia, which I think people actually have to pay money for to be certified in order to apply for jobs. And so there are other certification systems which maybe are already in place, which actually there's more incentive to become certified with. So it's a very complicated issue. There are many countries in the world, many systems, cultures, frameworks for management. So we tend to think, as North Americans, of our own model, and that also, I think, includes our concept of certification, what it's useful for within the context of our model in our country and our culture. So those are my thoughts, kind of finishing up. Paige, do we have any questions in chat that we need to address? Or comments?
We did have one. I'm not sure if we have time, but somebody, Chris Ayers, just asked, are there similar organizations to TWS in other countries, and how difficult would it be for TWS to expand internationally? Kathan, are there any organizations like TWS in India, to your knowledge?
Yeah, there are many actually. WCS and WWF India, they are also doing some kind of international work in India, and I think there are many organizations whom we can collaborate with on specific projects. So that's also, I mean, can be done. I mean, I don't know or how it can be done organizationally, but I'm just saying that it also is plausible to actually match up with those organizations who has a good hold in their own country.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. I think we're pretty much now at the end of the webinar. It's now 6 o'clock Central European time. So I want to thank everyone for your participation. Thanks also to those that joined the webinar as participants. Thank you all for joining. And yeah, that's about it. So have a good rest of your day and weekend. Thank you very much.